Okay, I'm live. I'm Jay Fidell. I'm having a good time. It's Monday. Whoa, Monday. And that's Grace Zheng. She's a landscape architect. Smile, Grace. You know, you have to see, this is a landscape architect. If you ever wanted to meet one, we have one. We're going to find out all about her. Grace is a member of PBR Hawaii Landscape Architects. And this show is called Community Matters. And the title of the episode is Public Spaces Need Landscape Architects Too. That all drives off the fact that Grace is slightly mad at me because we organized this program called Public Spaces in Hawaii. How will we be able to regain and preserve them? And the notion that we don't really pay enough attention to them. And the new title, if you didn't notice, Grace, welcome to the show, Grace.
Thank you.
Thank you. The new title to this program we're doing on May 21st, Thursday of this week, is Where Did All the Public Spaces Go? Long Time Paving. It's off one of those songs in the 60s. I would sing
Joni
it,
Mitchell.
but you wouldn't like my singing. What?
Joni Mitchell, We
Yeah,
Paved
that's
Paradise.
the one. Yes,
yeah.
that's the one. Yeah. So, I mean, and the notion is that in Hawaii, we're going up, we're getting dense, we're getting complex, we're getting crowded, we're getting congested, all that. If that happens, I suppose you could make an argument for that as an okay process for building a community. I guess it's okay, although I think we could do better at it anyway. But if you do that, you have to preserve open spaces. If you don't, then you have an unhealthy community. This is my theory about it anyway. You have a community that loses touch with itself, that does not engage with itself. There's no civil engagement, civic engagement, and your democracy is at risk because you're relegating yourself to third-party communications like social media without ever talking face to face. That's why we like our shows so much, because we get to talk face to face. So I thought when you got mad at me because I didn't include you on the panel, I thought I would somehow try to make it up to you, okay?
Well, it's not so much that I myself wasn't included on the panel. It's just that overall, landscape architects, we design outdoor space.
And I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's landscape outside of architecture. Yeah. And so often the spaces that we design, which are plazas and parks and gardens, are not really given full credit. And the profession provides a wide range of services and focuses, and so I just thought it was important to talk about public space because, especially nowadays when it's so crucial, we as a profession, landscape architects, really play a key role, and I just want to give credit.
You're our last gasp, in a congesting city. Hawaii used to be all greenery and sky and ocean and all those natural things around us. I remember that, you do too. But in the last, 2-3 decades, it's all been paved over, and there are those out there who don't care about public spaces, but the public must care. For their own salvation, they must care. That's why this program, May 21st, Thursday at Laniakea, sign up, ThinkTechHawaii.com. The speakers are George Atta, who you know very well. He's the Director of Permitting and Planning at the City and County, an important person on all of this. Fritz Johnson, an architect who's seen it all over the world. Ben Lee, former city manager under Jeremy Harris. He's responsible, I say that in a nice way, for a lot of the public spaces that we have. David Miller, Architects Hawaii, a leader of the architectural community. Glenn Miura of CDS International. He was the guy that did Tamarind Park. Yeah. I'm really interested to see how that worked. Tonya Moy, you must know her. She's an architect, Fung Associates. Ian Sanderson, he's a lawyer and an engineer.
I had to look him up.
Yeah, an engineer, that's the operative part. And he's got to think about how public spaces relate to the changes we will see because of climate change. That's what he thinks about. Brittany Ta'amu Miyashiro is a young person just out of college who has expectations for public spaces, and she puts the demand on these people. Do it for my generation. Carol Taylor saved Kapiolani Park. He's a lawyer, and he's going to tell the story and why he cares so passionately about that. And finally, Scott Wilson. He's the president of the American Institute of Architects in Hawaii. And so they're going to tell a story. And I'm sorry you're not among them, but you'll be there, right?
Yes.
And we will have a chance to talk with you, engage with you.
I will ask questions, yeah.
Yes, okay. So first, how do you get to be a landscape architect?
Landscape architecture, so the profession is basically the planning, designing, and management of land. It sort of originated in England, coming sort of from the idea of like parks and gardens, but it really became prominent when Frederick Law Olmsted, who is known as the father of landscape architecture, designed Central Park. And
which
Central
is a work
Park,
of genius
right,
yet today.
And not only that, he designed Prospect Park in Brooklyn and a lot of the major parks in the country, and sort of started this legacy of providing open space. In the time that he lived, cities were getting really cramped. There were certain health issues and tuberculosis and et cetera, et cetera. And he
1850.
Right, and he made the case that we need healthy outdoor public space, outdoor space, parks, in order to be healthy, because he called Central Park the lung of the city. And fast forward to these days, of course, Central Park is managed by a conservancy, and we will probably talk about how private entities manage public space, and that's really the success to a lot of public spaces. But Central Park essentially went through kind of decline in the 70s and 80s, and it really, as a park, has not only provided the green lungs for the city, it's also provided an increased property value exponentially for all of the condominiums
Everybody
and apartments around it,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
And so there are inherent health benefits, but also property value benefits. And I think those two things come hand in hand, and management is another big part of it. Landscape architecture as a profession, and when I say,
I'm too interested in what you said up to this point.
Yeah.
Before we go to that point. Okay, now you spoke about England, and you spoke about Frederick Law Olmsted,
right,
and Central Park and Prospect Park, and it being a lung of the city. I mean, lung is so anatomical. I mean, it's the breathing anyway,
right,
of the city. But where I'm lost on this is, what about ancient Rome? They had public spaces where citizens were defined, a little as a smaller group of people.
So
subset.
the confluence of landscape architecture as it relates to Rome, like Roman public spaces, and as essentially a stage for people to express opinion, and landscape architecture from England really kind of, in my personal opinion, happens in the United States. So Rome, it's really, the Agora, for example, is urban public space where someone can give a lecture, and it's their soapbox, essentially, and it's culturally integrated. In England, it came from really wealthy estates of aristocrats. So the reason it's called landscape architecture, the landscape is in front of architecture, is because for a lot of the aristocrats in England, they wanted a rolling hill and a landscape before you arrived at architecture, so their giant house.
It was an adjunct, an accessory
right,
to
right.
architecture.
It's sort of the integral approach.
Yeah.
It's the majestic road and the views and the trees and sort of the lush green
Nothing
lawn
wrong with that.
that approaches the architecture that really is kind of how you frame your guest's view of your land that you own. So that's why the profession, the term is called landscape, because it's before architecture.
Okay. But
And then in the United States...
wait, before you get there. So now, I remember the Tuileries. I remember all those wonderful green spaces in France.
Right. Which are not public, but they were, for a very, very long time, private spaces.
That's true.
Yeah.
And they came off the royalty.
Right.
They came off the landed.
Right.
And I think they came off the landed in England too, but
Yeah.
they became public over time. After the French Revolution, everything was public.
Well, actually, United States, we had public parks before England did. It was always, estates were always a private thing, and only your guests were there to use it, but really it was there for you for like hunting purposes, right?
Yeah,
of this, the land. In the United States, it was really created, parks became a thing because the poor, the plebeians, had no space to be healthy, and because of disease, they really needed outdoor space to exercise.
Side, you'd be all cramped up in a tenement.
Right.
But you could go to Central Park it was a big deal. And
Right.
you could have a little space for yourself. But, I just wonder what, when did, in the US, it was different than in Europe. In Europe, it was like a minuet, right? It was formalistic. You had the Tuileries, for example, or all those formal parks, formal open green spaces, architectural spaces in England. Come to the US, it's different because it's for the people. And you plan it differently, you do it differently, right? It's not formal.
I'm not quite sure if form has much to do with the fact that it is a public space. It really has to do with the Beaux-Arts movements and the time period it was at, what was fashionable to design. The reason that we had modernism, postmodernism, and if you look at parks by landscape architect Dan Kiley, for example, or Lawrence Halprin, who did a lot of fountains, it's really a lot of their designs are of that age, and it's not really about public space per se as the design trends of that time period.
Okay, all right. But everybody seemed to recognize whether you're rich or poor, you need a little space.
Right.
And you can't get all cramped up. And in the 19th century, people were getting really cramped up.
Right, and the profession of landscape architecture, when we do our licensing exam, part of the ethics is that the number one thing as a landscape architect is you're out there to protect public health, safety, and welfare. And then this whole welfare, as ASLA, American Society of Landscape Architects, is trying to redefine. It has originally, it's become sort of a derogatory term, but the original intention of welfare is really to provide for the health of the people. And so embedded in sort of the soul of our profession is improving public space and private space for the health of people.
What about dialogue? Remember Hyde Park and Speaker's Corner?
Right.
In London? That was for democracy.
Right.
That was to First Amendment kinds of considerations. Are you including, I didn't hear you say that.
It's not necessarily included on purpose, but it's never really excluded if it's a public space. So one thing I think is really interesting as a profession is that we're still service sector. Unless you're on the public sector side, where there are landscape architects, in the city, there are landscape architects who work for the National Park Service. So for a lot of parks, so New York City Parks Department, for example, there are it's predominantly landscape architects. So for them, that's their duty, is to provide public space for the public. But if you're on the private sector, it really depends on what your client desires.
Yeah.
And if your client
Big difference.
The city, for example, or if it's a state agency, then what your client would like.
Well, that's a problem because government. I'm going to put this.
Well, we won't get into it because a lot of it has to do with land use, and then for developers, it has to do with trading credits and providing public parks, in lieu of whatever housing units.
Right.
We won't get into
Politics.
that. Right.
Politics.
And it's all about, and I'd like to think that public agencies are trying to get the most they can out of developers to maintain open space, to provide for the public as sort of a trade-off, that type of open space credits.
We could do a whole other discussion on the politics of that, and who's pushing who to do what and why, and how competent they are in obtaining your services and in giving you instructions and allowing you the room you need to do creative. So when we come back from this break, Grace, we're going to talk about creative. We're going to talk about the essential creative thing in you and in your profession, and what you can do for us, and how we can motivate you to do it. This is complicated, but good. That's Grace Zheng. She's a landscape architect with PBR Hawaii. She's also the secretary of the ASLA Honolulu, am I right? Mm-hmm. Okay, we're here on Community Matters because community does matter, especially here. We're talking about public spaces need landscape architects too. We'll be right back.
Hi, aloha. My name is Chris Leatham, and I host a show called The Economy and You. The show plays every Wednesday at noon, and on my show, I bring on guests who are interested or working in the technology space. And so I'd like you to come and watch the show and learn with me about all the sort of exciting things that we're doing in Hawaii to build and grow our economy ecosystem. So I'd like to say aloha, and I look forward to seeing you on the show. Thank you.
Ted Ralston, folks, host of our show at ThinkTech Hawaii called
Okay, we're back, we're live, we're here with Grace. Grace Zheng, she is a landscape architect with PBR Hawaii, and she is the secretary of the ASLA, American Society of Landscape Architects. And we're talking about public spaces.
Hawaii chapter.
Hawaii chapter.
Not the entire.
Yeah. Why not? Be ambitious.
When older, yeah.
Okay, now, and so I wanna find, you know, I never met an architect who wasn't an artist. Even if you don't see it at first, it's always there. Some of them were like Tonya Moy. You know, she was a fine artist before she was an architect. A fine artist. That's her training. What about you?
I actually, funny thing is, I was pre-law in undergraduate / pre-med because my parents made me. Because, you know, I'm Chinese.
I'm glad
so,
you dealt properly with
yeah,
that.
and that's, and I was always interested in biology and have a love of plants, but I have a fine arts background as well. You know, ever since I can remember, I've been taking drawing lessons, and I took a lot of fine arts classes and photography classes in high school. And when I went to college, it was such a drastic change to jump from having some type of fine arts in my life and creative expression to just strictly science that I didn't quite adjust very well, and was lucky enough to stumble upon landscape architecture, which is really this, what I think is a beautiful blend of art and science, because you have to have the aesthetic sense and appreciation for design and form, but understand a lot of the technical side that allows things to be constructed, right? You have to understand plants, appropriate plants and microclimates. You have to understand construction, drainage, site grading, and a lot of manini details that really makes it possible to be constructed. So I think of it as a really good blend between art and
I'm so
science.
glad you got to this place. And I was going to ask you the question, do you like your work?
I do.
I knew that. So tell me about your career. What school did you go to, and where did you go work first?
I went to Cornell University for undergraduate, so I have a Bachelor of Science in Landscape Architecture. After that, I moved to Southern California and worked for SWA Group for a few years, and just found Southern California not to be my cup of tea. Not a fan of driving. So I moved to San Francisco, and I worked for Peter Walker and Partners. And for those of you guys who don't know, I mean, I really loved working at Peter Walker and Partners. He designed the World Trade Memorial in New York City, the 9/11 Memorial. It was I learned a lot, extremely educational. And for me, I reached a stage in my career at that point where I really wanted to think about theory of landscape architecture as well as city planning, because a lot of the projects we worked on, I was frustrated on the receiving end of doing construction details and working with consultants of a lot of the issues that arose were, well, why didn't we plan for this in the first place? Or why is this park this shape? Or why are we dealing with utilities now? Or why are we missing all of these infrastructure that should have gone in a while ago? And so I became very interested in city planning.
And this is part of it. The whole thing has to be thought of together.
Right, exactly. And everything is so integrated and interdisciplinary that it's kind of difficult. I mean, verbally we describe it between professions, right? There's like engineering and civil engineering and planning. But the reality of it is it's a long process. Much of it is political, regardless of private or public sector. And it's a cyclical process of planning, master planning, building, management, renovating, replanning. And so I realized that it was important to have sort of a long-term vision and understand all the pieces that fit in and all the steps that lead up to landscape architecture. And I felt that it was important for us to talk about design and landscape architecture and green infrastructure, essentially, using parks and planting gardens and planters as a way to remediate stormwater, for example. So that is something that has to be planned for in the beginning. Something like complete streets and providing safe, wide enough pedestrian access and bike access. A lot of that is integral to a city grid, which has to be planned for. So I went back to school for a Master of City Planning, and I thought for the kick of it, I might as well get a Master of Landscape Architecture as well. And I did that at Cornell a couple years ago.
Went back to Cornell?
Went back to Cornell, yeah.
Wow, you liked Cornell?
Well, I went for the city and regional planning program, which is, I think, like top 4 in the country.
Was that with coming to Hawaii in mind?
No, it wasn't. I actually had the intention of moving back to San Francisco. You know, there's a lot of sort of progressive biking, you know, green infrastructure culture
are happening.
Right, in San Francisco. And I kind of felt that fever, if you will. But I met this guy in grad school, Matthew Gonzer, actually. I think you guys had him on the show a while back.
Yes.
He works for Sea Grant, and so he actually came and interned at Sea Grant and like loved it, loved Hawaii, loved everything. And so I moved out here with him, and just understanding that Honolulu as a city has so much potential. The way we kind of talked about it was San Francisco, like, it doesn't really need me. You know, like, there are a lot of really good designers, there are a lot of really good planners, everyone's really progressive, we kind of have the same ideas, and Honolulu as a city is like, I mean, like, no offense, but we're sort of many years behind.
It needs you.
Right. And I just realized that I could make a bigger difference here and be of more help as a person, as a landscape architect, as, you know, a planner. Well, not really a planner, planning background. So that's kind of
Is it working out the way you expected?
Everything's a process.
Okay.
The island's very small. Everyone knows everyone. So that was my #1 lesson. But, you know, I see progress happening.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about the cycle track, for example. The King Street cycle track is this game changer.
Only if they do it again and again.
Yes, it's like a life changer, because we don't have a car by choice. We are choosing to live sustainably, and so we only take the bus or we bike. And I can't describe how many times I've had a near-death experience, even biking, on Yonge Street.
Yeah.
But that's sort of the price I have paid to choose to bike. But I think the city is making this great move to do a cycle track and planning more bike lanes, and it's highly appreciated. I can totally.
Good.
So good job, Mayor Caldwell.
Shout out for Mayor Caldwell for doing that. Yeah. Okay, so what's the status right now? You said that it had plenty of potential. You know, potential can be a curse as well, because potentially you want to go
There's
there, you want to
expectation,
fix it,
right?
but you also get frustrated if you can't. So what's the status of open space that would benefit by a landscape architecture in Oahu right now?
I like to think of it as 2 parts. There's open space that we need to protect. So obviously there are watersheds, and that's protected by the state. But then there's also open space that are current parks that, they're zoned for parks, or they're actually open space that are actually parking lots. And there are a lot of empty lots in Oahu. We can talk about Kalihi and Kakako. So every time I see a parking lot, I see this as a potential park space or plaza space. It doesn't have to be entirely a park, but if it's a parcel, if it's a lot, you don't have to do a building that takes up 80%, with its footprint.
Do you know the story of Frank Fosse in the parking lot behind City Hall?
I do not.
I'm going to tell you.
Okay.
He did some strange things, but one morning everybody awoke to find that the parking lot behind City Hall had been made into a lawn. He did it by getting the contractors to come very early without telling anybody, and by the time the workforce got there, by the time the city was waking up, this big parking lot was now a lawn. It's still a lawn today. It's exactly that you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a critical point to make, is that we do build parking garages, we do, parking structures. There's no reason we can't do a green roof. or a blue roof, which is just something that retains water and controls stormwater. It happens everywhere. There's so many rooftops in Hawaii. You know, I just don't understand why we can't have more green roofs.
The rooftops are beautiful
Yeah.
places.
As open space, right?
As open space, yeah. I remember, without, you know, going location to location, but I remember parking lot decks on the very top. You can see the city. It's like having a great view.
Right.
A view up, but there's space to let you look up. And you could make that into a green lawn, be
Right.
wonderful.
So people could use it, you know, it's not
Yeah.
just for people to look at, it could be for families, for kids.
The economics comes into play,
Right.
though. I mean, if I tell you, okay, you're a developer, I say, build another level on your parking lot, one more, only no cars there, no revenue, and put green grass. And he says to me, who's gonna pay for that? Because I gotta amortize it. Who's gonna pay for it? What do you answer?
I like to think of it as he's absorbing the cost long term, because they've done, I mean, this has been proven, any type of rooftop that is exposed to the sun, I mean, it has to be, excuse me, waterproofed, right? Long-term exposure to UV rays is degradation to any type of material. It's proven that green roofs actually increase the life of any roof, period. I mean, as long as you do it well, waterproofing and drainage and all that. And so over the course, the lifespan of a parking garage, you can probably reduce the maintenance costs and cooling costs and ventilation costs of your structure by having a green roof.
And letting your employees, and if you're a better person,
Right.
letting the public in on that roof. And I remember, I think in the AmFac building, has a space up there, small space, with some landscape architecture where you can go and sit and have lunch. But I'm talking 30, 40 years ago, and I doubt it's still there because, you know, the waves have washed over us and we don't seem to care as much. And that goes back to my question. What's our status now?
Our status?
Are we where we want to be or not?
I think, excuse me, we actually have a lot of parks in Honolulu as a city, and the Trust for Public Lands did a recent study of the ratio of, you know, park space to population and per capita, and we're actually doing okay. But of course, the city and the state is expected to increase in population very rapidly in the upcoming 2 decades or so. And by that stage, we're not really going to have, you know, the healthy number of park space.
Yeah.
I say that, but I also want to note that it's about the quality of public space as well, because sidewalks, for example, are public space. So if we improved our sidewalks and we added, we widened them and we gave them seating and planting
Trees,
and
whatnot.
trees, not only does it make it a better pedestrian experience, this is actually a type of public space where someone can sit, someone can stand on their soapbox and, you know, talk to the public. And so it's not just about parks and lots and parcels.
Everything.
It's about the integrated, right, the grid, the vein, everything that stitches a lot of our spaces together.
We need landscape architects everywhere, in every project, on every street corner, on every sidewalk. You know, I think of those streets in Manhattan. It's funny, everybody sees Manhattan as a lot of congestion and noise and all the tumult, whatnot, but in fact, they've done a really good job, not only at Olmsted's Park, but all those little pocket parks around the city, on the High Line, for example, the Battery Park, South Street Seaport, although somebody told me that's getting old these days, because you have to attend to the...
Right.
But, you know, it's everywhere. I don't know if you're familiar with Michael Kimmelman. He's the architectural critic for the New York Times, and he speaks a lot around the circuit. And you know, to your point, he says you walk out of your house one day and you have to get somewhere. Everywhere you go in the meantime, it's public space.
Right.
And it all should be good. And if it's not good, somebody has to do something to make it good. So it's a big job.
It is a big job. And you mentioned the High Line. I love talking about the High Line. I mean, this is really to Mayor Bloomberg's credit of allowing this idea to proceed and supporting it. But it really came out of this grassroots neighborhood community where,
Two guys.
yeah, 2 guys, they loved it as infrastructure, you know, it was historic. and they got like famous fashion designers behind them, and they fundraise all this stuff. But the High Line is this unique experience because nowhere can you walk linearly and experience buildings, right, and be over streets. It's completely safe. When I visit, we see people, different times of day. In the morning, it's like it's a racetrack. They're like local runner. Everyone's like on there because you can run for, gazillion miles without stopping and being worried about it. And then, the whole area changes throughout the day. You have the coffee drinkers and newspaper readers. Then there's tons of tourists, lunchtime, all the locals come out. Everybody's there. It is so special, and it's actually tied, the lower Meatpacking District up to like 32nd Street, all the way to the Convention Center to Javits. This is really something that's really unique, and actually when I think about that in Honolulu, not so much as an elevated context, we should really have something like that from Waikiki all the way down
along the water,
to the harbor, right? This waterfront is so unique.
But it's like abandoned. It's like Mad Max at Thunderdome.
It really,
it's a desert.
I think
with tumbleweed blowing through it. I got to take a break.
Okay.
This discussion makes me want to take a break. We'll come back. That's Grace Zheng, PBR Hawaii. She's a landscape architect here in a city that needs landscape architects big time. Okay, we're talking about public spaces, how they need landscape architects too, here on Community Matters. We'll be right back. You'll see.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen. I host Likeable Science on ThinkTech Hawaii, and I do this because I care about science literacy in Hawaii. I want to spread the understanding that science is a vital and interesting part of everyone's life. I want to make sure the broadest possible spectrum of people understand the beauty and the value of science and realize that science plays out each and every day of their lives. I want you to understand that science is fun. So we bring onto this show each week guests who are scientists, from astronomers to zoologists, and we talk about what they do and how they do it. But most importantly, we talk about why you should care about their work, why you should see that their work has value and impact on your life. So I hope you'll join us Fridays, 1 p.m. here on ThinkTech Hawaii. You can watch us via live stream. You can watch us recorded on Olelo, and you can see us each week. We hope you'll join us.
We're back. We're live. We're here with Grace Zheng. She's a landscape architect. Okay, Grace, this is free form now. You talked about building something, open space, public space, with landscape architecture, say, along the water, and that would include Kaka'ako, include everywhere from, say, Aloha Tower. In fact, it would go further. It would go the entire waterfront. Why not? Other cities have that. Why can't we do that? We are a city by the sea. We should be able to do that. How do you do it? What are your thoughts?
I think, so first of all, it's been talked about, right? It's part of the Lay of Parks process. A lot of community members are very interested in the idea, and I know the city is interested in the idea when they're currently doing the Alamana Beach Park master planning process. I mean, Chris Dacus is totally into it, and a lot of local residents are very interested in this idea of being able to walk or bike from Waikiki all the way to Aloha Tower and beyond. The issue with that, of course, is land use, and I mean, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a land use expert, but from what we have seen and the people that we interact with, it has to do with major landowners, it has to do with acquiring easements to do this connectivity, and it really, I think, requires people to actually physically sit together at a table, because we talk about it, right? Like you and I talk about it, I talk about it with other people, I know my friends talk about it with their other friends, but a lot of the major stakeholders, namely the city and private landowners, are not actually sitting down at a table together talking about this infrastructure, essentially, this service, this amenity that they can provide for the public. And I think the other side of it, for developers, for landowners, they want to know what is in it for them and what are their benefits, right? And I want to say, like, as a landscape architect, as a pedestrian, as a resident, when you have connectivity, it's good for business because people can get there faster. They don't have to deal with traffic. They don't have to deal with parking.
It's also an empowerment.
Right.
It makes the city yours. You get to own it.
Right, and it's about linkage, right? It's about connectivity, and when things are linked and more convenient, in an economic sense, you basically have less obstacles and less barriers to entry.
We've got to do this. Okay, so two questions. One is, how important is landscaping in a project like that?
Ooh, you used the word, Jay. So every time someone says landscaping, I cringe.
Landscape architecture.
Yeah.
I withdraw the statement, rephrase the question.
Okay. How important is landscape design in a project like this? I would say we're sort of the doers in the planning process, because you can plan all you want, you can draw it up. We need funds to do it, but the moment we have funds, landscape architects are the ones who actually make it happen, who do all the construction drawings, all the detail that goes into the paving and the railing and the connections and the sidewalks. So we're really there at the
You're
end
central.
to make sure
You're
it
just
happens.
as important as the architect, if not more important, because when it comes to open spaces, you guys know more about how to deal with open spaces.
Right, and it's really about an understanding of space and its connection to other spaces, and less about the object, which I think is the main focus of architecture is itself, whereas landscape architecture is about how to tie in all the different objects together. It's the space between. We're really the thread that stitches everything together.
Yeah, but you're also a renewal factor. In other words, if I take you to a place that was planned years ago, and it has fallen on hard times, it has been abandoned and there's tumbleweed there, and you can come in and say, well, we know what to do here. We're going to replan this. We're going to redesign this. We're going to brighten this up and bring it current, and that's part of your job too, isn't
Yep.
it?
We work with planners. A lot of landscape architects do site planning, physical planning. A lot of physical planners actually started out as landscape architects. So everything is very much crossed over and overlapping. But it really is about the very beginning of the process of seeing potential and going through it all the way till the end to the construction details and planting. Yeah.
And adopting it.
And
It becomes yours.
It is so critical that you say that, because the best part of my job, I think, is seeing something constructed and then watching someone use it. And a lot of times we have these design moves where I'm like, look at this curve of this wall and this material and finish. And, designers were obsessing about this. But when I see someone use this space and I see someone appreciate the detail, the paving pattern that I chose, it is this immediate gratification to know that I, in some way, improved their life a little bit by caring about this
Example
detail.
of a good space in Oahu.
I really love Tamarind Park because it is used so often. The design is very simple and elegant, and yet it allows for multiple functions. So the plaza itself in the middle is actually quite flexible as a space. There are a lot of events that go on there. It's very central. I also want to say that the private management group, the entity that manages it, they do an excellent job, because the thing that is not talked about so often is what happens to our design when it's constructed 5, 10, 20 years from now. It's really up to management, the team, to do a good job to keep it looking the best that it can.
Yeah.
And I want to say that landscape architecture design, it's not so much about something looking really good aesthetically. That's key, of course. That's almost the number one key. But a lot of it is about stacking benefits. So there's aesthetic benefits. There should be something highly functional and performing as well, like a machine, it's not just there for you to look at. Trees provide, oxygen, carbon dioxide sinks, right? And we can do so much more with planting and basically stormwater management to improve our water quality before it gets to the ocean than is really talked about. And I know the city has best management practices in their manual, and the state has something upcoming, but this is really also what landscape architecture is about. We design bioswales, we design rain gardens. We are always looking for a technical way to improve water quality that is also good looking at the same time.
I'm so glad you're here. You know why? I'll tell you why. Because I think that ultimately you're going to have an effect on things. You know, you're going to be able, like a magnet, you're going to garner other people of similar interests and sensibility, and you're going to get them together, and they'll be kind of a political force maybe, and they'll show this community that there's a need for this and that it's doable, and we have the talent, and if we think about it, we have the money too. And that your generation will actually make this happen. I'm talking to God now.
I think I feel really encouraged that you say that. Besides working at PBR Hawaii, which is, we're a planning and landscape architecture firm. I don't want to get in trouble with the planners at our office. I also, in my free time, I moonlight as one of the co-founders of a local nonprofit, Better Block Hawaii.
What is it?
Better Block Hawaii. So we helped the city DPP sort of set up their outdoor display for the TOD symposium for the past 2 years. We did a parklet for the cycle track opening. We support Honolulu Bicycling League and all these other nonprofits locally. But for us, the reason we started this nonprofit, Matt's one of them. It's Scott Glenn, Daniel Simonich. We started this because we really saw a need to provide innovative means to demonstrate how we can increase the livability of urban space and really start this conversation. It's not, I don't want to alienate architects, I don't want to alienate planners. It's really about all these professions coming together and generating ideas of how we can simply and cost effectively increase the quality of our urban spaces. And a lot of it is very simple. It's providing shade, it's providing simple outdoor seating, it's a little bit of planting, and for very low cost and a lot of streets, actually, we can increase sort of the pleasantness and the health of cities.
Yes, and that should be easy, but there are also these great possibilities, potentials, like New York, like Central Park, where you have multiple things going on, where it's just fabulous for any human being to be there. You have the cafes out of Paris, out of the big squares in France and Europe. You have parks to play ball. You have drinking fountains everywhere. You have dogs are permitted. You can sit, you can walk, you can read, you can stay there late at night and it's safe. And guess what? Bathrooms. I wrote about this in an article last week.
Yeah, bathrooms are.
And you have all this for the people, and it's a ripe pomegranate for the people. It's anything they ever wanted. They can come down there and feel part of it, express themselves, share, interrelate, face to face.
There is, the culture, culturally, it's culture of aloha is here already. And when we look at parks, I think, unfortunately, city just has an issue with managing its existing parks. I know that their resources financially is totally taxed, and you can't possibly be maintaining a lot of these parks to its top quality all the time. And I'm really interested on Thursday to see what various lawyers and architects and kind of have to say about the future of public parks and as it relates to buildings and the city managing it. And I think privately owned public spaces, POPOs, as it's called. San Francisco has a lot of those. I think those should really be part of the conversation as space that is managed really well but is available for the public.
And the conversation must be managed too. In other words, talk that ends in a vortex, talk that ends in a corner, that doesn't have action to show as a product of the conversation is wasted talk. You have to keep on pushing. You have to get that group together, make it bigger, make it reach out politically, make it reach out to the private sector, and ultimately it will become political will. It will become public opinion. The newspapers can and should be full of it. The media should always be talking about it. Nobody should be let off the hook. It has to be the high priority. Public opinion creates high priority,
right.
And your job is to create public opinion. I know you like landscape architecture and planning first, but your ultimate job is to create public opinion. And I want to help you do that. You have to come back, okay?
Will do.
All right.
All right.
That's Grace Zheng. She's going to be in our program on May 21st, this Thursday. She's with PBR Hawaii. She's a landscape architect and a planner here on Community Matters. And don't forget, public spaces need landscape architects too. In fact, they're really important to the process. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you, Jay.